Hey, good morning, afternoon. Life Community Church is another edition of More Than Sunday. Lauren and Tim here. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
And we took a break last week. We were at a conference,
Yep.
so we posted a bonus episode talking about the origin of our backdrop. And great story. If you missed that, go back and listen to it. It's a great story in the history of Life Community Church, of how God comes in and does a lot with our little bit if we trust him.
Amen.
Because that's who he is. He's a great God. So go check it out. But so we're actually kind of backtracking. We're going to talk about the purity test in Dream to Destiny. We're in the series Dream to Destiny. We're talking about the story of Joseph and what we can learn about the things that he faced on his way to fulfilling the dream that God gave him when he was a 17-year-old kid.
Right.
And so we're talking about in Genesis, off the top of my head, I can't say it. I don't know.
I think it's 31, but
Yeah.
I'm guessing
So
as
it's the part where Joseph is now in Potiphar's house. He's prospering Potiphar's house by being faithful. God's showing him favor because he's just choosing to be faithful right where he's at. It's unfair. He's a slave, but he's in Potiphar's house. And he's just continuing to be faithful and to be a good employee, good steward, a good slave, really. And God is blessing that because of his faithfulness. And he's showing up. Like, people around him are like, God's with this guy.
Yeah.
We don't understand, but God's with this guy. So he's also pretty good looking, is what the Bible says.
According to the sculptures.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
The sculptures.
I don't know.
Yeah,
like David, they always show him as a hottie.
So, this young Joseph has God's favor. Everything he touches pretty much turns to gold and is blessed. And on top of that, he's very handsome. And so it talks about how Potiphar's wife looked on longingly looked on to Joseph and desired him and tried to get, pretty much seduce him, try to get him to sleep with her.
Right.
And Joseph was like, no, I can't. I can't do this evil, this wicked thing. My master's trusted me with everything. He's entrusted me. He's raised me to this level of success. And I wouldn't sin against him, and I also wouldn't sin against God, who's also blessed me and been given me favor.
Yeah.
So purity, it's a big thing in our culture.
Yeah.
Well, it's not a big thing in our culture. That's the problem.
Yeah, that's the problem.
But we talk about it a lot.
Yeah.
We talk a lot about it as Christians. Our culture, we love talking about sex, so it's everywhere and everything we watch and consume. And so it's important for us to have the right approach to it.
Yeah. Yeah, this is, of course, a subject we talk about a lot. And so...
No way, really?
Yeah, I know, right? And so, kind of some of the stuff and the correlation with David, who failed the purity test.
Yeah.
Joseph passed it. David obviously failed it. And you can kind of look back and the effects that it had on his family. And so David pretty much raped Bathsheba and then went on to murder her husband and did all these terrible things and then to cover it up. And then his family, his own son, ends up raping his other daughter. And then he doesn't say anything. He becomes angry.
But doesn't.
And sometimes we feel like, oh, that's enough. Like, I was mad about it, but he doesn't do anything. He doesn't deal with it. Doesn't, discipline his son. And so I was just thinking about that. And shame becomes your measure and your guide for your life. And that is what happened with David.
Yeah.
Because he had shame and he had, in a way, done the same thing. He had raped somebody.
Yeah.
Then when his son did the same actions, he was like, well, I can't say anything.
Yeah, who am I to say something?
Who am I? And so that's what sin does in our life, is it becomes the measure of what we live and what we think is wrong instead of the Bible and the Lord. And I just feel like we have a culture of where purity wise, like no one's living up, no one's measuring up because pornography has become commonplace. Living with your boyfriend, girlfriend has become commonplace. And so we have all of these people that purity wise are failing. And then that becomes the measure of which they feel like is okay.
Yeah.
So we have a whole bunch of people living with that.
You're just doing what I do, so I'm not going to judge you.
Right. And so we have a bunch of men leading homes because they're addicted to pornography, that their measure of sin and what's right and wrong is so distorted. Instead of it being a biblical view, even as Christians, it's not, because they're living with hidden shame, hidden sin, because that's the thing. Most men are looking at pornography.
Yeah.
Doesn't make it okay.
No.
You know? And so you don't want to be a hypocrite because you're like, well, I'm sinning with this other thing. But hidden sin, first of all, never gets dealt with.
Yeah.
We know, and we've said you would just pray and be like, Lord, just take it from me. You wanted it. You wanted to move on. You wanted to move past. But the Lord was waiting for you to bring it into the light. I'm still using my thumb. And every time I do a thumb, a little bubble shows up. And I just did the thumb. And I'm going to be like,
did you see it?
No.
Oh, okay.
So there's like a little thing that happens. But you just know that when that happens, what was I saying? It just becomes the measure. What? Pause it. Did you record any of this? We don't have to. You know, so going back, pornography is so much more rampant. It's so much more commonplace. And I know that when you're living in sin and you start dismissing all other sin because you don't want to judge.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, and this is something we hear all the time, like, only God can judge me.
Yeah.
But that's not biblical or true.
Yeah. Especially if you're a Christian.
Yeah. So I can go to Tim and tell him some areas, and I do. No, I'm just kidding. Often.
Yes, you do.
But vice versa. Okay. And even people that we're living in community with, that is a part of being a Christian and being a community. And even, you know, if there's a believer putting things out there online, it's biblical to call them out and say, if you're a believer and you're claiming you're a believer, what you're doing isn't biblical or isn't right.
Yeah.
But when you are living in sin and living with hidden sin, what is that considered? Like, that goes away. What you feel like is permissive is okay.
Yeah, it's your standard.
Yeah, your standard. And so I was saying, I wrote down after that sermon, I was like, we live in a culture that brags about not being convicted. Becoming hardened to sin is nothing to brag about. And like, we see it all the time. Like, people are like, oh, well, I mean, I can do this. Like, I don't have an issue with it.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't think that's anything to brag about, that you don't feel bad about that.
You know, for instance, Game of Thrones. Gonna offend some people.
Ooh.
Right?
Ooh.
Game of Thrones, lots of nudity in it.
Yeah.
Right? And I've talked to some people that are like, well, it doesn't bother me. And I was like, well, it should bother you.
It should.
It should bother you.
Yeah.
It should bother you some of the things that we call entertainment.
Yeah.
And we're not willing to call it pornography or just, you know, just not good for us. Right?
Here's another one that, just because I feel like making people mad. I'm like, let's do this. Listening to Lil Nas X.
Yeah.
Who literally mocks God.
Yeah.
And at any chance, really.
Or Doja Cat.
Like, makes some demonic stuff. Yeah. Like, man, I love some Doja Cat songs. And then she did some demonic stuff, and I was like,
But even her content, you know, and what she's talking about, if you actually listen to the lyrics, it's just, you know.
Yeah.
It's no good.
Yeah, so I felt convicted about that. And you can block artists on Spotify. And so there are a couple of artists that I've blocked on Spotify just because if you're looping some stuff, sometimes stuff will just show up that you're like, I don't want to listen to Lil Nas X or whatever his name is. And
so sometimes in the sake of relevance, maybe Christians, and I've done this before, and it's like, oh yeah, that's not that big of a deal. That's not.
Oh yeah, me too.
But it's like, well, what's your filter though?
Yeah.
And so a lot of us walk around with dirty filters.
Yeah.
And some of it is because maybe we're trying to be relevant, or a lot of it is because we've got hidden shame and sin that we don't want to deal with. And so...
And it's hard. Like
and it's hard.
And it kind of sucks.
Yeah, it sucks to miss out.
Like I said, like I really liked some of those Doja Cat songs.
Yeah.
And then when I felt when like the Lord was like, no.
Yeah.
And especially when, she dressed up as a demon in one of her videos, and I was like, I'm gonna stop.
Yeah, you're playing with stuff you don't want to play with.
Yeah, I'm like, no, thank you.
Yeah.
So, because you know what, something I talk about a lot is, this is one of the things we talked about one day in a staff meeting. And I was like, the thing that occurred to me that was really wild to me, this has nothing to do with purity test.
Oh, okay.
Is when the Lord talks about don't play with those kinds of things, that spiritual stuff. Divination, all that kind of stuff. It's not because he's like, hey, y'all, that's not even real, so don't mess with it. Yeah. Like magic and all that stuff, like it's not real, so don't mess with it. It was like, it's demonic. That's why I don't want to mess with it.
So don't mess with it.
It's real, so don't mess with it. And it's just like, oh.
Yeah, and he's God's talking a lot about that in Leviticus. If you're doing the Bible recap with us, that's where we're at. I think maybe it was yesterday. There were some verses about don't consult mediums or divination. It's wickedness, and just remind you, like, I'm the God. Yeah, I'm the one who saved you out of Egypt. Yeah, it's me, not whatever
that is.
Whatever you're communicating with over there. Yeah. But yeah, so like I think it's with David, his shame affected his filter. Yeah. Oh yeah. And it's not that internally he didn't know that it was wrong, but it's like, well, maybe it was I don't want you to bring up what I just did, yes. So I'm not gonna mess with all that. Right. I'm still licking my wounds over here. But that's the thing about if we really trust God with even our failures, that it really doesn't have power over us, because while it might be embarrassing, what you're saying when you're really repenting and you're admitting your failures and where you've slipped up, and you're saying that, God, I trust in your forgiveness and I trust in your restoration more than what any person can do to me. Right. I trust you over the consequences that I probably will still have to walk through because I've confessed this, and because I'm, because a lot of times when I was, hiding stuff from you, and I was just constantly looking at porn, and just it was bad,
being a total piece of crap.
Yeah, being
I'm just kidding.
But I mean, yeah, and then pretending like, oh no, I never struggle with that, all that stuff. It was definitely affecting my filter. And gosh, where was I going with that? I was on the way somewhere.
It affected your filter?
Yeah, it affected my filter, but so one of the reasons, because I was so worried about the consequences of coming clean, and so that was a deterrent.
And there were consequences.
There were. So just because then I turned and did the right thing and dealt with it rightly didn't mean that there wasn't the consequences.
But I think about that guy that we just found out, the pastor that you knew that had the affair, and I'm like, he's waited 20 years. Yeah. And it's come out in the light 20 years, and I'm like, just think of the torture that he's been dealing with for 20 years. Yeah. And the shame, and that his filter was jaded. So if people in his church were having affairs, he was kind of like, yeah, you should stop. Don't do that. Like he probably was it just messed him up. And you just think,
so he's 60 something.
If that had been dealt with 20 years ago when it first happened, he could be in such a different and better place, because I believe the Lord restores, and the Lord's restored our marriage. And I think that's what's best, and that's what he wants. Because I don't think cancel culture is biblical. Because I want to do it.
Well, I'd be canceled.
Yeah.
Several times.
And I wanted to cancel you. No. Yeah. And so I don't, as much as like, I think the human nature wants to cancel people. And so I understand it, but it's not biblical at all. Because my goodness, we'd all be canceled.
Well, because it's our sense of justice.
Yes. Yeah.
But if you read
again, because our sin muddies what we think is right and wrong.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, so with purity, and I would challenge any guy who's struggling, there's going to be consequences. Yeah. But when you align yourself with the
and
Lord,
women, because we know that women are struggling, and it's not
and a lot of the things that you've said, right?
It
is because of the door that I've opened.
Yeah.
And we've done a lot of, talking. We've done a lot of research.
Yeah.
We help people through this.
Yeah.
And that's led to a lot of reading and research and talking and thinking. And so like you're not coming at guys like, oh, you're just all a bunch of pieces of crap.
Gosh,
but it's just like, that because that was me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm just a normal guy.
You did a 12-step program.
Yeah.
So many people maybe don't know that.
Yes,
to
I
get
did.
through this,
I
Tim did a 12-step program.
I did.
With a guy.
And other stuff. Too.
Yeah. Lots of other resources.
Counseling and...
Tim paid for one-on-one counseling, so it cost us.
Yeah, it cost us.
Financially. And so we want people to know if this is something that you're walking through, you can reach out to us. We are open books about this and how it affected our marriage, our sex life, all of the things. We are very open about it. You can reach out to us, and we are obviously not counselors, and we're blunt, and we're probably not
horrible counselors.
Yeah, we would be, because we're like, you guys suck.
Yeah. Stop cutting your hair in a chili bowl.
Yeah.
Or just stuff like that. No.
But we do have people that we can put you with, and books and resources if this is affecting your marriage.
Yeah.
So
we would love to help, or if we
even if you're not
can't,
married
we can
yet.
direct you.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you do the right thing, right? Say you've messed up and you're just deep in a sexual addiction or whatever in this area.
Mm-hmm.
So like to me, I've failed this purity test for a very long time.
Yeah.
But then what made me pass it was aligning myself with God and what He wanted me to do.
Yeah.
And what He wanted me to do is to confess and come clean and get help.
Yeah.
And He can't heal what we hide.
Yeah.
And that didn't mean that there wasn't any consequences.
Yeah.
But He promised to never leave me or forsake me.
Yeah.
And He proved Himself to be faithful. He walked with me through those consequences.
Yeah.
So I want to encourage you. Yeah, there's going to be consequences.
Yeah.
But God promises to walk with you through it. And He did it with me, and He did it with us.
And avoiding the consequences for a short term doesn't mean that they don't eventually come out.
Yeah.
I mean, just like that guy.
Yeah, so I was thinking, he's in his 60s. He did that for 20 years, so a third of his life he's been living like that. And I'm thinking, like, well, actually, I know how that feels because I lived a third of my life that way. Mm-hmm. That's a long time.
Yeah.
And it that's not God's plan or
and
will
that,
for us.
it just magnified the betrayal for me.
Yeah.
Was if it would have, like, because I'd ask you, I'd say, hey, I read that a lot of guys struggle with pornography. Is that something you struggle with? Because, like, if so, like, let's get you some help, and you'd be like, no. That's what you sound like. No, I don't. No. You'd be like, no, it's just
golly
not,
gosh.
Oh, gee, Willie, that's definitely not anything I struggle with.
Yeah.
And so because you blatantly lied to me when I gave you an out, that made things so much worse. And just hiding things for a longer period of time make things so much worse.
Yeah.
For sure.
And so, in this area, you can't operate in this area in a bad way without lying.
Yeah.
So then it's not just the impurity, it's not just a sexual sin, it's the deception, it's the lying. And so like for people who think like I'm good in all the other areas, but this area I'm not, it affects every area of your life.
Yeah.
And
for instance, David's sin affected
right.
the way he led,
and
all of the things.
And generations, it affects your family, whether you feel like, we've been fed this lie that porn, it doesn't affect anybody. It's just images.
And those women want to do it, that like they're getting paid for it. There's like all the so many lies about that too.
Justify it. And it's like, you're not actually doing anything.
These are two consensual adults, and we're watching them, and there's nothing wrong with that. And
what they don't know won't hurt them.
Yeah.
What your family doesn't know won't hurt them. Yeah, it will, because eventually it'll come out, because that's what sin bears death.
Yeah.
And death will come out. And it affects your filter. So guys, if you're dealing with it, I just want to tell you that it's affecting your filter and your ability to make decisions for your family, whether you realize it or not.
Yeah.
It affects your ability to tell the truth. I was a blatant liar.
Yeah.
And my goal in life is to be a blatant truth teller.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's not very nice looking.
Yeah.
But yeah.
One of the things I've seen in a change is, I've talked about this a lot, was with worship. I couldn't wait to see you lead worship unhindered by that.
Yeah.
And I see that the way you lead worship now is just so different than before, which was, I think, a really neat thing to get to see. And I think your wisdom is totally different. Like, I feel like you hear the Lord more.
Yeah.
Versus prior, not as much.
Well,
and just, there's a lot of difference.
Yeah.
Those
So
things.
like, in order to, because I was a Christian walking with the Lord, but this area of my life, I wasn't letting God touch. And so like, he was still faithful, still loved me. My salvation wasn't in the balance of maybe not being, but I wasn't effective as a Christian. And I was telling God to shut up a lot. So he was still speaking. But
it's kind of like that.
I didn't want to hear it because I knew he wanted me to deal with this. Like, hey, I need you to deal with this now. And I was like, no. So I was shutting down, and my heart was becoming more and more hard to the Lord.
Yeah.
And so, I wasn't hearing that wisdom, because the part God really was like, you got to deal with this. I was like, no, hey, tell me something else.
Yeah.
And so, it's repeated sin hardens your heart and affects your ability and affects your view of God.
Yeah.
You start to think of God as like, oh, he's going to expose me. He's going to try to get me. And so it's like you're playing this cat and mouse game with God. And it causes you to question his character with, really, he just wants to heal you.
Yeah. It's kind of that example that I used 2 weeks ago about the highway. And like, you were living life not on the highway. Because you weren't being pushed where you weren't being blessed.
On the service road.
You were on the service road.
Chilling.
And there's lots of stoplights on the service road. And lots of detours. And so you're not getting to go 70. You're getting to go 35.
Yeah.
And so I would say that there is like, I literally can see the difference. And you were going the right direction. You were living for the Lord. But man, it's just been a totally different life since you've been set free.
Yeah.
And you got to merge onto the highway. Fully exposed, and just, a life fully submitted to God versus partially. And full submission is hard.
And honestly, I can't say that my life is fully submitted to God, to be honest. It's every day.
Yeah.
It's an everyday thing.
Yes.
And every day the Lord shows me things that, I need to give that to you.
Yeah.
I need, I didn't realize I was holding on to that. I mean,
I know.
That's the walk.
Right.
But it's still good. It's so good because I can look back and be like, man, I'm so much more free than I've ever been. And I know that I'll look back in 10 years from now and be like, hey, I'm more free than I've ever been.
Right. Oh, yeah.
So the purity test is really the very first test we have, because it's the one thing that we're all given. We're all given our bodies, and how we steward our bodies, and how we give the thing that's special about sex and who we are. So if we can't, if we can't steward that well, we're not going to reach our destiny. We're not going to fulfill all the dreams that God's called us to do. Yeah. And so it's like, this is kind of like the one thing, like we've talked about how God blesses you with finances, resources, all this. This is the one thing that you have from birth. What you are going to do with your body, what you are going to submit your body to. Are you going to save yourself for marriage? Are you going to only have, this part, or maybe some of you will never have that part, and you just submit it to God. And so are we going to align ourselves with what God says about our bodies? And even when it comes to being, a Texas conservative Christian, you're doing all the other stuff, but you're a man-ho.
Texas conservative.
Well, I mean, I just think that we claim Christianity is like, I do all the moral right things.
Look at me.
But then, I know guys, and
all of that is more of a look than
it's
an actual
look.
heart
It's
thing.
a look, because when it comes like, well, I'm still single, so it's like I'm not committed to anybody. And a lot of single people think this way. I'm not committed to anybody, but I'm a Christian and I go to church, so like what I do in the bedroom doesn't matter. And it does. What you do with your body is God is looking. The Bible says God is looking. He's searching the world for those hearts, the hearts of people who He can fully support. And so if He sees that you can't steward this area of your life, He can't support you in the way that He wants to.
Yeah.
And so, I would challenge anybody who's kind of like, well, that's kind of archaic philosophy about purity and marriage and sexuality. I would just challenge you to ask the Lord about it and look at the Bible and just really, really reconsider and ask the Lord to speak to you about it. Because I just think that this is an area that we kind of give a lot of people an out on because of the circumstances and, economy and what's normal and what's not normal. And so, I just felt like I needed to say that.
All right.
Because it's important. Well,
we always got a lot to talk about on this subject.
Yeah. But
again, you can totally reach out to us. If you have any questions or, maybe it's just, some ladies that want to reach out to me, I am free and open. So.
Yeah. And same with you guys. If you have any questions, I've got answers. You might not like the answers, but, I can talk from experience. God is good, and He wants us to walk free. Yeah. And He does have a special purpose and a plan for your life, not just my life, not for you to just watch other people do. He's got something exciting that He's excited about, that He created you for, that He was excited about when He created you. And I want everybody to find that and see that. So, purity test is so important.
Yeah.
What we do with our bodies and submitting to the Word of God. But thank you so much for listening to us, taking some time out of your week, and we will see you Sunday.
Bye, y'all.